Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you.
And now being heard in 178 countries, which is weird because Bill only speaks English and not very well.
Oh, don't you know, it's the Bill Arnold Show. It's Bill.
And a warm welcome to the Bill Arnold Show. Thanks for joining me today. We are going to stay in the Old Testament today, and I'm very excited. Anna Rask Emerson is here, an assistant professor of Old Testament studies right here at the University of Northwestern. And we're going to talk about the Patriarchs. And you've got such amazing notes, Anna. Once again, you prepare unlike anybody else that comes on this show.
I come prepared, yes.
Well, I would say over-prepared.
Over-prepared, probably. How much time we got?
It's fantastic. I just love it.
Thank you.
So I don't want to waste any time. Let's get started. Let's open the book of Genesis and get going.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I was excited to talk about the Patriarchs. I'm teaching a Pentateuch class right now, and I grew up in the church, and I think that I was initially uncertain about exactly how all these narratives came together. I had some questions going into the text, and I never realized growing up some of the artistry of this book, the twists and turns, the surprises, the irony, and I find it's beautifully written. But I encountered the questions of like, well, it's not exactly telling us to be like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel, because they are deeply flawed people. But I had a professor in my own seminary training once tell me that these narratives are not telling us to be exactly like the patriarchs and model all of their behavior. It's showing us that we as humans already are like them. We already are flawed. We already are messed up. We are deeply flawed in need of God's grace. And to see that God works through these people mightily has been an inspiration to me. And I see some of their own struggles in my own life. And I think that a lot of people can relate to these stories. So I'm excited to chat with you about them. What I've learned is that this is a very well and carefully organized book. It's a unified story. In the first 11 chapters, we hear a world increasingly opposed to God's purposes. There's judgment again and again, but God's grace is never absent. And so you move through who knows how many years of history in Genesis 1 through 11, but then we really slow down in Genesis 12. And over 80% of the book now focuses on Abram and his descendants. And a word I want to point out to your audience here is, it's in Hebrew. It's the word toledot, and it really means this is what became of. And they're essentially headings, its own headings throughout the book, that you get what's called the toledot of Terah. That's Abraham's dad. It's really about Abraham. The toledot of Isaac is really about Jacob. The toledot of Jacob really about Joseph. And so it's what became of each one of these characters here. So as we look at the story of Genesis and we meet Abraham or Abram in Genesis 12, we hear this big call from God. He shows up and he calls Abraham to leave his home, his work, his family, his clan, and in that ancient world, it provided identity, protection, economic security, and to ask to leave that was to step away into vulnerability and uncertainty. And we hear that God makes these extraordinary promises to Abraham. He'll become a great nation. He promises to bless him and make his name great. And what I love about that, especially as I walk with my students, is in Genesis 11, you've just read about the Tower of Babel. And in the Tower of Babel, they're trying to make a name for themselves, and they're trying to make their name great. And yet then in the very next chapter, we hear God say, Abraham, I'm going to do that for you. What was once an effort of pride and autonomy in the Tower of Babel, we see that God is doing that for Abraham. So he promises to bless him, bless all the families of the earth through him, and that's really the climax of the promise of ultimately through the person of Christ. We'll hear Paul pick up on this, that through this promised seed or this promised descendant, which is Christ, we'll have the blessings of the nations. So really you get these key themes of the Pentateuch: land, descendants, divine protection, and blessing. These are the promises of Abraham that really sum up the theme of the Pentateuch.
Okay, Anna, let me ask you a couple of quick things. Because you've said some important words, toledot.
Yes.
Let's just spell that for people, because they're going to wonder what word they heard.
Right.
So in English, it would be...
To transliterate it, it'd be Toledot.
Okay.
Toledot. And you're not going to find that in your English
but
Bibles.
That's how you would pronounce it.
Yes. And it's essentially what became of... Insert the personal name. Yes.
They could be referring to a generation, couldn't they?
Yes, absolutely. Some versions will say this is the account of, or these are the generations of. Mm-hmm. There are genealogies in Genesis. A toledot is not equivalent with a genealogy, but it can contain a genealogy.
Right. And then tell people what the Pentateuch is.
Pentateuch is the first 5 books of the Bible. We can call them the Torah. You can also call them the law, but there are so much more than laws in the Pentateuch. It's really a better word, I think, for the word Torah is instruction. It's teaching us through laws, through narrative, through poetry. It's teaching us about what God is doing and how he's accomplishing his plans in these early stages of the people of Israel.
Awesome.
Yeah. So when Abraham gets this big call, I think what is striking is that you don't hear him bargaining, you don't hear him delaying, it just says he went. And while faith is not specifically said in Genesis 12, we don't hear that word, it is truly a step of faith. And I'm not saying Abraham is super mature in his spiritual life, but this is the beginning of his spiritual journey. And so we get him down to Canaan, but then you already hear like a little blip in the story here, because we hear a famine comes to Canaan, and now he's saying, well, I'm going to go down to Egypt. And I do think that makes sense from a human perspective. I mean, Egypt has the Nile. It's going to provide fertility and you'll have food there. But I think there we see that Abraham has his first struggle here in his spiritual journey. He gets afraid. He thinks that they'll see his wife, Sarah, and say, oh, she's so beautiful. We'll take her. We'll kill you. So he asks her to lie. He lies. He says, oh, she's my sister. We're not married. And this puts God's covenant promises in danger. And yet God intervenes, and Pharaoh, ironically enough, actually rebukes Abraham for his behavior and says, get out of here.
Because Pharaoh takes Sarai into his household.
He does. Mm-hmm.
So he's thinking she's available.
You're right. And puts, again, those covenant promises at risk of the promise of offspring and descendants, while Abraham, again, his wife is taken because of his lie. But God intervenes here, and it is notable that he essentially puts some types of plagues on Pharaoh's household. And Pharaoh rebukes Abraham once the truth becomes known and says, get out of here. Yeah, he sends him away with some possessions. Couple things to note about that. In a few chapters, we're going to learn that this woman, Hagar, Sarah's servant, is an Egyptian. And I have to wonder, is that where they got Hagar, down in Egypt? And I wonder if they would have stayed in Canaan, would the whole story look a whole lot different? We'll see their behavior against Hagar in a few episodes. But also just in terms of the structure of this narrative, we're having some foreshadowing of the book of Exodus. I mean, think about this. In this episode with Abraham in Egypt, we have a famine that brings him down to Egypt, which is what happens at the end of Genesis. We have promises threatened. We have God intervening with plagues, which happens in Exodus. We have the people leaving Egypt with wealth, which happens in Exodus as well. So the narrator here is foreshadowing what is going to come in the coming books of the Pentateuch here. And so I think recognizing this is a literary piece of art is really fascinating to know what's coming in the rest of the story after you've read it. So I find that a fascinating episode, but we really see Abraham struggling here. God appears to him after this incident. They get him back up into Canaan, but he points out this tension. I still don't have a kid. I still don't have a son. And God says, my promises are true, Abraham. I will bless you. Your reward will be very great. The promise remains unfulfilled, though, even though God establishes with a covenant and makes this promise to him of offspring and of land. And one of the most fundamental scripture verses in Genesis appears in Genesis 15:6, where Abram believed the Lord and God credits to him as righteousness. And this is in the midst of not having a son. Very few of these promises have even panned out yet. He had a contingency plan. This guy named Eliezer, he'll inherit my estate because I don't have a kid. But God says, nope, I'm going to make it happen. And that verse is actually quoted 3 times in the New Testament to make this point of it's by faith. By faith, not by works, that we are justified. And Paul points back in particular, and James too,
Anna,
the faith of Abraham.
To Abram's credit, I mean, the tension he has, pretty legitimate.
Yes, I understand it.
I do too.
Yeah, I feel for him in a season of waiting, and he's going to keep waiting.
Yes,
but,
he is.
He tries to gently point out, hey, I'm making a contingency plan here. Your promises have not panned out yet.
Yeah.
And from a human perspective, I get it. But God is in the midst of working in his life. And we see, unfortunately, in the next chapter, Sarah and Abraham, even though he had faith, they kind of take matters into their own hands. And Sarah suggests that Abraham use Hagar, her servant, as essentially an ancient surrogate to procure a child. And I get that there's actually evidence that this was a culturally accepted practice, but I don't think the scriptures here are condoning this behavior. We see thus that this leads into a whole nother crisis here. Once Hagar finds out she's pregnant, she displays some pride, and Sarah has jealousy, and Hagar ends up running away. And at this point, Abram feels that, oh, well, this was the promised child, and now it's gone. She hasn't even given birth yet, and this promised child is at risk. But what I love to point out is, as Hagar is in the wilderness, she's probably running back to Egypt here, God shows up to her. And he says, this son you're going to have, name him Ishmael. It means God hears. And what I love about that is that he hears Hagar. He hears her struggle. He hears her pain. And he does call her to return. But he says, I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for a multitude. And that is, she is the only woman in Genesis who is honored with such a revelation. Many men are, but she is the only woman in Genesis. And while her child is not going to be the promised child, God will take care of her and her family.
That's interesting, Anna, that she is the only woman in Genesis who is honored with such a revelation.
Yeah. Yeah, it shows you. I mean, she's really used and abused by Abraham and Sarah. She doesn't have any words up until we get to the wilderness. And so she's really this silent character that we might forget about at times, that Abraham and Sarah used her for their own advantage here. So it's a sad story, but at the same time, God intervenes in the midst of it. I do think it's important to note ages here. The next time God appears to Abraham, he is 99 years old. He was 75 when God called him to Canaan. So he's 99 years old. We hear kind of part 2 of God's promises. He changed Abram and Sarah's names. And what I think is ironic about this is Abram means exalted father. He's gone through 99 years. Well, I mean, Ishmael was born, but he's gone the majority of his life being called exalted father, and he's never had a kid.
That's a little nutty,
Ishmael's
isn't it?
Born. Yeah. And now Abraham means father of a multitude. And so, I mean, he's only going to have that one. He's going to have Isaac, but I mean, the idea of multitude is still many, many years in the making here. God also gives him the sign of circumcision as the covenant sign. And he says, oh, by the way, it's not Hagar. It's going to be through Sarah that you'll have this promised son. And you may know the classic reaction. Abram laughs. Even Sarah laughs when they hear this because she's 89, he's 99. And at this point, Ishmael is about 13 years old. And I point this out to my students. I would argue Abram has not been waiting for another promised son. He thought Ishmael was it. He's not been waiting 13 years for God to show up and say, actually, oh, we're still waiting on your promised son. And he actually says, I mean, can't Ishmael live under your blessing? And God says, I'm going to take care of him. But he is not the one through whom this promise will go through.
So in other words, not a good idea to laugh at God either.
Yeah. Well, and their kid, Isaac, his name means he laughs. So every time, think about it, you're calling your kid, you're reminded of the time you laughed in the face of God's promises.
Yeah, brutal.
So not great.
Brutal.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Isaac is born a year later. Abraham's 100 years old. Sarah's 99. They now laugh with joy that Isaac is born. We come now to, fast forward a little bit to chapter 22. I would argue this is really the pinnacle of Abraham's spiritual journey. Again, we've waited 25 years for Isaac to be born, and now he is born. This is probably several years after his birth because he's carrying the wood in this episode. But it's Genesis 22, and Isaac is Abraham's only hope for descendants because Hagar and Ishmael were sent away. And Abraham, like chapter 12, is called to kind of do the unthinkable. And what we see is he just goes. He goes and he trusts that God will act. And Hebrews in the New Testament actually tells us Abraham even thought God would raise the dead if he was going to kill Isaac. Now, we don't see human sacrifice as something that God ever requires, but at this critical moment when Abraham has made the internal sacrifice, that's when God shows him a ram in the thicket. And the place is named Yahweh Yireh, meaning the Lord will provide, showing that he did. But true worship is costly. And if Abraham had any sense of idolatry about Isaac, God has brought him to a point through this test to show him God is the only one that he needs to be relying on.
Okay, is there a little practical application to today?
I would argue, relying, again, through this whole spiritual journey, relying on God, relying on his timing, even in seasons of waiting, trusting in the promises of God, recognizing he is the one that will provide. And if we actually kind of look at the text here, it has been suggested that where Abraham almost sacrifices Isaac, that actually is the site of Jerusalem. And so people point towards to Christ and point towards this substitutionary atonement, just like the ram with Isaac, Christ with us, this idea of the sacrificial death of Christ, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So trusting in that provision, that once we make these kind of internal sacrifices, we recognize that that is true worship, where we leave it all on the line. Abraham had nothing beyond this. He was laying it all on the line, saying, I trust you, God. I trust you enough to do this.
So good, Anna. We're going to take a little break and be right back with Anna Rask Emerson. We're talking about patriarchs in the book of Genesis. So if you just joined us, we're so glad you're here. And I hope you're having a great day, and we'll be right back in 90 seconds. Hi, podcast listener. I'm Bill Arnold, and my theme song says, "What's for dinner?" And like when I'm grilling, I'm paying really close attention. And I know that ideal second to get the food off the grill. Like all good and ideal timings in life, right now would be an ideal time to be a cheerful giver to Faith Radio. Give now to support this podcast so that more people in more places might come to saving faith in Jesus and grow in their relationship and become a fully devoted follower. Click the link in the show notes or give now at myfaithradio.com. Thanks for being here today, Anna Rask Emerson. We're talking about patriarchs, and this is a fascinating study right from Genesis, and I love how you have put it together and helped us understand these patriarchs. How about we move on from Abram to Isaac?
Absolutely. If you look at the Genesis narrative, you'll notice that there is far less about Isaac compared to his dad and his son. But the narrative does turn to him. And while he does not dominate the story of Genesis, he is that essential bridge through which the covenant promises move forward. But there are some very interesting things about his life. Abraham sends a servant to go up and find a wife for Isaac up kind of where Abraham originally left from in Haran, where his extended family is. And Rebecca responds with faith and trust. She comes back and is Isaac's wife. And what we don't always realize is about 2 decades pass before she's able to have children. And we could kind of do a whole nother study about the infertility of the matriarchs, if you will, with Sarah and with Rebecca. But she ends up conceiving. Isaac prays and she ends up conceiving. And before the boys are born, she actually gets a bit of a prophecy here. God is declaring that 2 nations will emerge and the older will serve the younger. And we consistently see this theme played out throughout the book of Genesis. And this is not just about these 2 boys, Jacob and Esau. It's about the nations that will come from them, Israel and Edom. And so we move into the story of these 2 boys' lives, and Jacob is the younger son, and I would say he is not like his grandfather in temperament or in character. He is a deeply flawed man, deceitful, which is basically his name. Deceit, or he grasps at the field. He's the heel. He came out grasping Esau's foot. He's a calculating, self-reliant man, and yet through this deeply imperfect man, the nation of Israel will actually be born. So we get to the adulthood of these boys, and Esau is the firstborn. And there's an episode where Esau's out hunting and he comes back, and in a very calculated way, Esau knows he's hungry and says, "I'll trade your birthright for this bowl of soup." And in the ancient world, the birthright represented a double inheritance. And this is challenging, though. Jacob and Esau are twins, and Jacob is technically younger, but that would have been really challenging to lose out on the double inheritance of their dad Isaac just because he came out of the womb a few seconds later. So Esau is essentially selling his birthright, which would be the majority share. He kind of views it and treats it, his inheritance, as worthless. He's hungry, he's impatient, and his birthright would be nothing if he's starving. So he values this immediate satisfaction over God's long-term promises, and Jacob gets his birthright, gets the double portion here, plus anything that would be given to him. Now, we distinguish birthright from patriarchal blessing. Blessings are what, like, the dad would bestow upon his children. They're kind of prophecies, but it doesn't mean they're always going to come true in exactly that way. But when it's time for Isaac to bestow these blessings, every family member acts wrongly. Isaac and Rebekah knew about this prophecy that the older will serve the younger, and yet Isaac has a favorite in Esau, and he tries to give Esau the best blessing. He shows favoritism. Rebekah and Jacob, they've got their favorites there. They don't respond with faith. They go with deception, which is Jacob's kind of calling card here. Jacob disguises himself, lies to his nearly blind father, and steals the blessing that was meant for Esau. Now, this was about shaping these boys' future. They could not be revoked, but the narrator makes it clear that this deception is not approved by the Lord. And Jacob will spend the next 20 years essentially paying for what he's done. And Esau's anger causes him to run away, and tragically and ironically, Rebekah will never see her favorite son again. She's dead by the time that he comes back. And so Jacob flees north. He's going to go back to where his mom Rebekah was from, up in Haran. And this is where God begins to get a hold of him. He has a dream about this staircase with angels as descending and ascending. And he wakes up and realizes, I think this is a holy site. And God confirms to him the promises made to his dad and his grandpa here. And he says, I'll be with you. I'll protect you. And Jacob does respond with, I would call, tentative faith. He makes a conditional vow saying, okay, I'll worship you, but you've got to bring back me safely to this place. Rather than trusting God fully, Jacob effectively tests God. And whereas Jacob tests God, Abraham was tested by God. So an interesting reversal in a couple generations here. And what I find so fascinating is when Jacob gets up to Haran, he meets his uncle Laban. And I like to describe it as this: the deceiver becomes the deceived. Because now Laban tricks Jacob. He tricks him into marrying Leah before Rachel, the older daughter, and he manipulates his wages repeatedly. And so Jacob is getting a little bit of a taste of his own medicine here. Yet God takes care of him. He blesses him with family. We get the 12 sons here, prosperity and protection, even as we get kind of this rivalry amongst the sisters and amongst Laban. And the favoritism theme continues. Just as Jacob's parents favored one son, now Jacob favors one wife over the other. And when it's time to get out of Haran and go back to Canaan, Jacob still relies on deceit and deception. He tricks his uncle to kind of get out of there. And now we kind of come to the crux of what I would argue of Jacob's come to God moment here. Jacob approaches his homeland, and he's remembering 20 years ago his brother wanted him dead. So how are we going to resolve this? Well, fearing revenge, Jacob sends these extravagant gifts ahead. He divides his family into two groups and possessions. Hopefully, if Esau attacks, one group might escape. And then amazingly, it's like for the first time here, Jacob actually prays. His prayer, the most genuine moment in it is when he confesses his unworthiness, acknowledges God's faithfulness. And yet, when he asks for deliverance, his trust remains mixed with self-reliance. But here we are beginning to see Jacob realize his own inadequacy, and he is breaking down. Even as he continues to scheme before advantage, but he is breaking down. God is breaking him down. And on the night before he meets Esau, he's left alone on one side of the river. And we see this is exactly where God wants him, a state of vulnerability, the feeling of being in need and having no recourse but to rely on God. And this is where the real struggle, and we'll hold on to that word here, begins. God is ready to bring Jacob back to Canaan, but there's a lot of baggage he can't take with him. He can't go in as he is. He needs to be refined. And so we get this classic episode where Jacob fights with a man. Now, we're going to learn this as a manifestation of God, but he is demanding a blessing from this man. And Jacob has been embodied by his name his whole life, deceiver. And yet now we have this renaming that climaxes this lifetime of struggling with God. God changes his name to Israel, which essentially means he strives with God. And I'll also have this physical reminder of this place because this man, this figure God here, touches his hip socket. So he'll now walk with a limp the rest of his life as a reflection, a reminder of kind of what he's been through. So we see his name change, but we also see that he does too. A new identity, a new submission to God. This struggle has not been about strength. Jacob is probably in his 90s at this point. So it's not about strength, it's about surrender. He's reached a breaking point. He tried to manage life on his own, but that is collapsing all around him. And he is now ready for genuine dependence on God. And we see the next day he meets Esau, and instead of violence, there's reconciliation. And here's another thing I love. He bows humbly and he insists that Esau accept his gifts. And he explicitly calls it my blessing. Essentially returning what he stole 20 years ago. And we see this beautiful restoration between the two brothers at this kind of climactic point in the story.
I love that restoration. It's a great part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's one last little element about Jacob's life that I want to touch on before we move to our last major character. If you recall, he made a promise. If you bring me back safely, this place is called Bethel, it means house of God, where he had that dream. He said, I'll worship you or honor you as God. But Jacob doesn't go to Bethel. He goes to a place called Shechem, and there's devastating consequences there. We see that his daughter is violated by the prince of Shechem, and Jacob really passively hesitates to act. He doesn't want to do anything. He's really willing to let his daughter marry this man. But two of her brothers, Simeon and Levi, they say, well, we'll take it in our own hands. And they respond with deception, just like their dad, ironically, who's always deceiving people. And they misuse the covenant sign of circumcision, and they go in and they slaughter the people of Shechem. And they disqualify themselves as covenant heirs. They're the second and third born after Reuben, and we'll talk about him in a second. But this is a crucial episode. It reminds us that Israel is so close to intermarrying and assimilating with the Canaanites that it threatens the covenant. And it shows us human schemes really only are multiplying the violence. And finally, when Jacob gets his act together here, he goes to Bethel. God does reaffirm the covenant, promises of land, descendants, and kings, showing his promises won't be thwarted by human sin. But we unfortunately see the family's instability continuing. When Reuben, the oldest firstborn son, who would have got all these birthright inheritance rights, sins with his father's concubine, no less, and permanently disqualifies himself as the firstborn. And so we see, coming up with our next story here, this paves the way for son number 4, which is Judah.
Boy, there's a lot of mess going on here.
There's a lot of mess. Very dysfunctional family.
Yeah, I mean, Simeon and Levi, they have a fairly good strategy. Talk all these men into getting circumcised, and when they're recovering, attack them.
They attack and kill everybody.
And and clean house.
I appreciate they wanted to actually defend their sister, but they went about it in the completely wrong way, whereas Jacob was so passive about this.
Yeah, no kidding. We're going to take a break and come right back. More with Anna Rask Emerson. We're talking about the patriarchs out of Genesis. If you have a question or comment, the text line is open, 877-933-2480. 888-848-8284. We'll be back. I'm back with Anna Rask Emerson, and we're talking about the patriarchs. Quick question that came in. Jacob was such a deceitful person. Why did God have so much mercy on him? And why did God choose him?
Yeah. Well, we could probably ask that about all of us. Right?
That is true.
We are so messed up people. It shows us we need a savior. We can't save ourselves. And like I said at the top of the hour, we read scripture and we're like, oh, I should emulate this. I should do what it says. Well, not exactly with these stories. We see them filled with sin, but it shows us God can use people often in spite of themselves.
Yes.
But he gets to a point where we need to come to full self-reliance on him, not self-reliance. And so he uses Jacob, he uses Isaac, uses Abraham, he uses Joseph, who's not perfect either, but it shows us that, God works in spite of ourselves at times to accomplish his promises and his plans.
You've been thinking about something since you were a kid.
Yeah, I would read Genesis and I was like, well, why all of a sudden are we at Joseph's story? Joseph is the 11th born, and the covenant promises are going through Judah. Why not Joseph? And I always wonder that. And you do have to read carefully. And I want to track us as we talk about Joseph's story. I want to track Judah's story. But we've essentially just chatted about why Reuben, Levi, and Simeon just counted themselves out because of their bad behavior. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to the fourth born. But at the same time, we center on the person of Joseph, who gets a lot of blessings, but God chooses to bring about his son through the line of Judah, not Joseph's line. So I want to bring us to the story of Joseph, as this is maybe one of the most well-known in Genesis. He's the 11th born. He is the firstborn son of Rachel, who is Jacob's favorite wife here. He will have a brother, Benjamin, a full brother here. And so we'll track that. And I want us to read carefully through this. But the Joseph narrative cycle is going to explain how God preserves this covenant family by actually bringing them to Egypt. And I know Egypt is going to be a tough place of 400 years of enslavement, but we will actually see God has a plan and a purpose throughout that pain and that suffering. In Egypt, they become Israel. They become a nation, a formidable nation, that Egypt is even threatened by them. But Joseph's story begins with him a little bit older. It begins with divine revelation. God gives him dreams in which his family is bowing to him. And kind of like maybe a young kid here, he tells his brothers all these things, and maybe a little arrogantly, and his brothers are mad at him. But this sets the trajectory of the entire story. And horrible theme emerges again, favoritism. It's like, okay, Jacob had his favorite wife, Isaac and his Rebecca, his mom, had their favorite sons, and now it's like, Jacob, are you kidding me? Why are you having a favorite son? But it's, of course, because it's the first son of his favorite wife. Mm-hmm. And so we probably know this story, but he gives him a visible sign of this favoritism with this beautiful robe here. And it's a symbol of kind of Joseph's elevation amongst his older brothers, which fuels their hatred. And so this is, again, a really well-crafted narrative, but Joseph is sent to go check on his brothers as they're out tending the sheep, and resentment reaches a breaking point. And they want to throw him in a pit and tend to kill him. But Judah steps forward, and when he sees these Ishmaelite traders, he says, well, let's sell him instead. And so let's watch Judah through this narrative as we move forward here. Reuben maybe tries to kind of get back in his father's good graces. He tries to rescue Joseph from this pit. By the time he gets back, Joseph is gone, though. So we see Joseph is betrayed, he's sold, he's carried down to Egypt as a slave. The narrative is thick with irony. The brothers' attempt to destroy Joseph becomes the means by which his dreams are going to be fulfilled. So we follow this narrative down to Egypt with Joseph, but I want to pause because this narrative in Genesis 38 pauses to recount the story of Judah and Tamar. And you might feel like, what in the world? Why is this even in the biblical text? But this episode is crucial in explaining why the line of blessing shifts decisively to Judah after his brothers, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, disqualify themselves. So it's a long story, but I'll just kind of summarize. Judah has 3 sons. sons. This woman, Tamar, marries the oldest one. He's deemed wicked and he dies. The second one is deemed wicked as well and dies as well. And Tamar is supposed to be marrying the youngest son. That was kind of the standard back then. And Judah refuses to give her to him, give him to her. And so she comes up with a plan. And it's kind of an eyebrow-raising plan, but yet the narrative doesn't condemn her for it. She ends up procuring a son through Judah himself, and actually he's left speechless when she kind of puts the pieces together saying, hey, you're actually the dad. And he comes out and says, she is more righteous than I. And I believe this is the beginning of Judah's repentance here. And we're going to see it. God has big plans through one of Tamar's sons. She has twins, but it's through Perez will come David, and in the far future will ultimately come Jesus. And so far from being a digression in the Joseph narrative, this episode safeguards the messianic line. And it highlights this moral corruption of Canaan, showing why we need to get down to Egypt as a place of preservation rather than merely relief from famine. And it also juxtaposes the next episode, Joseph's kind of good sexual ethics as he resists the advances of Potiphar's wife. So Joseph ends up in prison in light of that Potiphar's wife episode here. And this is where the dreams kind of begin to be fulfilled. He, of course, interprets the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker, but then interprets Pharaoh's own dreams. And we see that through it, God's revealing messages. And even in prison, the text continually repeats, God is with Joseph. And because of the interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams, he's exalted to second in command over Egypt. And he very strategically stores grain before a famine spreads. And when the famine does happen, all these nations are coming to Egypt to get fed, ironically, beginning to fulfill what God first promised to Abraham all those years ago, that all the families of the earth would be blessed through Abraham's offspring. And this is just a little teaser that's ultimately fulfilled in Christ, but we're starting to see, wow, these other nations blessed through Abraham's offspring. Now, of course, Joseph's brothers are going to arrive, and he recognizes them immediately, but it's been a couple decades here. They don't know who he is, and he, of course, looks different, is speaking differently, and Joseph takes a chance to test them. And again, initially just reading this narrative, I never noticed what he was doing. But if we read carefully, we realize his motivations here. He's trying to see if they have changed. On their first visit, he imprisons his brother Simeon, and he demands that they go back and bring Benjamin, his full brother, through his mother Rachel. And he starts to engineer a situation that is going to mirror their earlier betrayal of him. And now take a look who comes on the scene. Judah is the one that convinces Dad Jacob to let him bring Benjamin back to Egypt. And he says, you can hold me personally responsible for his well-being. And I'm thinking, we've got some real character growth in Judah here. And it's on that second journey to Egypt, Joseph honors his brothers lavishly. He specifically favors Benjamin, but then he does something else. He plants his silver cup in Benjamin's grain sack. And once that's revealed, we realize the brothers are given the same choice that they once faced with Joseph. Will they abandon a favored son of Rachel, or will they sacrifice themselves? But this time we see everything is different. Judah is actually going to step forward, and he's going to offer himself in Benjamin's place, pleading because he sees his father's grief for the past 20-some years here, and he refuses to wound his father Jacob again. And crazily enough, the brother who once sold Joseph now offers himself as a slave to save another. They essentially passed his test. They were not willing to do to another son of Rachel what they initially did to him. And it's at that point that Joseph finally reveals who he is. And he declares probably the most central theological truth of Genesis. What his brothers meant for evil, God actually meant for good. And he did it to save many lives, because look at how many lives are being saved through the storage of grain during this time of a famine.
And Anna, wouldn't one of the most important lives that needed to be saved was Judah's?
Absolutely. We need Judah.
The line's coming through Judah.
The line's coming through him, and we see this beautiful character growth and character development God has worked in Judah's life as well. And we see that, yes, through this line, through Tamar's son Perez here, Judah's line continues. And if you look at the genealogy of Matthew 1, we got all these people listed. And yes, it culminates in the person of Jesus Christ.
So how do we orchestrate it that Judah doesn't starve to death?
Yeah, God's provision.
God's
right?
provision.
Yeah, God's
Joseph
provision.
is in charge of the grain and make sure that family gets
What you
fed.
intended for evil, God intended for good, to be able to save so many lives.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
It is. It absolutely is. Yeah, it's so well written. It's so magnificent in how this narrative is arranged. Would you like me to wrap up the story here, or you want to take a couple minutes?
I think we'll take a few minutes and we'll come back.
All
Anna
right.
Rask Emerson is my guest. We're talking about the Patriarchs today, right out of Genesis. If you have a question or a comment, it is welcome, 877-933-2484. We'll be right back.
Psst, have you heard the news? Listening just got better with the new and improved Faith Radio app. No more restrictions, no more static, no more missing your favorite shows. Now, listen when you want, where you want, and share with everyone. When you need hope, encouragement, Jesus, it's right there on your phone. Text the word app to 877-933-2484 and follow the link or search Faith Radio Network in your app store.
We're talking about the Patriarchs with Anna Rask Emerson. Here's a question that came in, Anna. Is there a reason that Joseph imprisoned Simeon? Of course, Judah stepped up. He told Jacob that he could kill Judah's children if he didn't return Benjamin.
Yeah. I'm not sure if there's a specific reason that he chose Simeon, but he chose one of the brothers to, you're going to stay here as kind of collateral here, and you're going to go back, you're going to bring my biological brother. Of course, they don't know that yet. He needed to give them a reason to come back. And of course, imprisoning one of the brothers and then making this claim, this demand, you need to bring Benjamin back with you.
Right.
Yeah, but it's amazing to see how Judah steps up and, in a sense, I don't want to push too far into this, but kind of offers himself as a substitute too. And I don't want to push too far.
I've always seen it that way, so I don't think you're pushing too hard.
Yeah, just being careful with the narrative but we see Christ coming through that line. We were talking about substitution and Abraham's story, Judah's story, so carefully asserting that, but interesting to note.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we just chatted about the fact that Joseph revealed himself, and we have this reconciliation amongst the brothers. They are still a little concerned, or even after their dad dies, are you going to kind of get revenge on us? He says, no. And we see that the family moves down to Egypt. And you might think, oh no, don't go there. We know what's going to happen. But actually, twice in the story of Genesis, we learn that this is a part of God's plan and divine approval. Back with Abraham, he told him that your descendants would be enslaved for 400 years by a foreign nation, but I will bring them out of there. And of course, he doesn't know at that point what this is meaning. But Jacob is even told by God, yes, you can go down to Egypt. I'll make a nation for you out of there. This fulfills God's promise initially to Abraham. And so they move down to Goshen, where there's multiple of food, and they flourish. They become a people. And looking at the whole book of Genesis, this is actually an echo of Genesis 1 and 2. God initially said, be fruitful, multiply, increase in number. And while that's a message for all of humanity, that's what Israel is doing here. They come down as a group of like 70, and potentially it's debated, are they in the millions or the hundreds of thousands when they leave Egypt? But clearly they're a force to be reckoned with. There's a lot of people that were born while they were down there in Egypt. And so before Jacob's death, we see that he blesses his sons. And Joseph has two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and he deliberately blesses the younger over the older, which is a pattern we've seen throughout Scripture, at least in Genesis here, this long kind of pattern of divine reversal, who you think is going to be getting the blessing, but it's actually the younger son. And when we focus in on Judah here, we get even more information about kind of his this future, we now actually see Judah will receive the promise of kingship. It says the scepter will not depart from Judah until the ruler who comes to whom all nations will bow. And we look at that and we say, as New Testament Christians, okay, I see where this is going. Not only do we have the Davidic line, all the kings in the southern nation of Judah, part of the line of David, but then we're pushing forward to a clear anticipation of the Messiah. Now, Joseph, we don't forget about him, but he's not the one through whom these covenant blessings are going through. He does receive kind of the richest blessing after Judah, and we get this promise of land reaffirmed as well. And now you won't see tribes of Joseph, but you'll see his sons who are kind of adopted, so to speak, by Jacob, with, Simeon and Levi having kind of counted themselves out, but they're kind of adopted, and you see the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh as you look at the territories of Israel. So Jacob dies in Egypt, but he is buried in Canaan, again, kind of clinging to this promise of future fulfillment of the land. Joseph once again reassures, no, God has turned your evil into good. And before his own death, we see what's going to be picked up in Moses' story. Joseph dies in Egypt, but he asks that his bones be carried to the promised land. And when Israel does leave Egypt, they do bring those bones with them, declaring kind of this faith in God's promise that it will surely come to pass. And so as we wrap up Genesis, of course, it's opened the door for Exodus. It's a springboard to what's going to happen in Exodus. And we open that book and we hear God remembers. It's not like he's forgotten, but he remembers and he's about to act. He's about to get his people out of Egypt. That's not where they're meant to stay. It's not where his promised land is going to be. But Genesis ends with not completion, but with hope. The family's in Egypt, the nation is forming, the blessing is advancing, God is working slowly, sovereignly, faithfully, turning betrayal into deliverance, suffering to salvation, and broken families into people through whom redemption in Christ will one day come to the entire world.
Yeah, what a fabulous study, Anna. Before we wrap up our time, I've got a couple of questions. Here's one. I just read this morning that Benjamin had 10 sons when they went down to Egypt with Jacob. I thought he was just a boy in the story.
No, probably not just a boy. It can be a little hard to track the ages of everyone, but he was definitely older than that. I think we always get these images like, yeah, he's just a baby or just a kid or something. But no, he's of an age, where, he's going down with 10 sons there. Joseph is probably down in Egypt before the brothers arrive for maybe like 20-some years or so.
Okay. Another question is, do you know or have any insight on the number of times that Joseph wept? He wept so passionately. I can relate to this, to his tears because of a family that I was estranged from and basically thrown out of the clan.
I don't recall the exact number of times, but I know that he wept before he revealed himself to his brothers, and he kind of had to excuse himself too. But I can only imagine the pain that he felt of being betrayed by his family, sold by his family. And again, now he's trying to kind of re-engineer a test of seeing, have my brothers indeed changed? He loved his dad too. He hasn't seen him in decades. And so it is a beautiful moment of reconciliation when he does reveal himself. But again, we can see how easily it is to relate to these stories. We see the same human emotions, the same human conflict, the love, the anguish, the pain. It's not hard to see ourselves in these stories as well. And so I feel for that listener there that is experiencing some level of familial conflict in which they can relate to the pain of Joseph.
Boy, the book of Genesis sure has a lot of mess in it, doesn't it?
It does. It's my favorite book, though.
I love Genesis.
I love it. It's just fascinating.
Why do we love it so much?
Because we, as I said, we see ourselves in it. We have these same desires, these same longings, the waiting, the pain. It shows us the reality of humanity, but it's filled with hope of God accomplishing his promises. And I think what I relate to about Abraham, too, is he dies with very little of these promises being fulfilled, but he waited in hope, and he's in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11, right? And these are not perfect people, but at the same time, we see ourselves in them, and we, too, wait in hope. Of course, we are living post-Christ, though. He's already come, but we live in hope and wait of his return and for the day where he makes all things new.
So good. This has been a fabulous study. Thank you so much, Anna. Anna Rask Emerson has been my guest. She's the Assistant Professor of Old Testament Studies at the University of Northwestern. And I believe, Wyatt, you took some classes from Anna.
I did, yeah, and they were a lot of fun. And it sounds like you're teaching some of the same ones still,
Yeah,
which is
we're
great.
still doing it. Yeah,
no, they were always a lot of fun and learned a lot. So
Yeah.
just
And
like we did in
more
the
than you went through. Brothers went through as well.
That's true. That is correct. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
fun. I sometimes get whole families coming through.
That is great. That is great. So thank you again for
Thank you.
being on the show. And I have learned so much. I can't wait to go listen to this again.
Yeah.
Honestly,
you
I
can go back and study more.
I'm
Yeah.
going to. Trust me.
Great,
Yeah,
great.
thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for supporting Faith Radio and just being there and caring about us. It means a lot. We're going to take, that's all the show we have for today. So we're going to take off until tomorrow, but we've got a great show planned for you tomorrow as well. And we're looking forward to spending time with you. Have a great night, and I'll see you then.
Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.